Please, the floor is to you. Thank you, David, again for coming.
Ok, grazie Gianna. Buongiorno a tutti. Benvenuti a Lucca. As you can tell, I can't speak Italian. So I will speak in English maybe for 5 or 6 minutes, and then Gianna will do a short summary. So I hope you can follow me, and it's reasonably clear. Yes, Gianna said, well, I said I want to talk about digital capitalism. She said, well, what about fake news? What about social media? So I have this very big title now. It's everything, really. Okay. It's a bit of a cliche in a way, but I think we are at a point of change in the media environment. The media are changing significantly. And I think it's at a point of change that it's really important for us to look back and look at history. I recently read a really interesting book by a man called Fred Turner. The book is called From Counterculture to Cyberculture. And what he does is really give us a history of the internet. And he traces the origins of the internet back to the 1960s, back to the hippie counterculture. I mean, these guys here, they're not actually the Grateful Dead. This is Steve Jobs and Wozniak, who were the founders of Apple Computer. And what Fred Turner does in his book is he follows the history from the idealism of the early hippies. He looks at a book called The Whole Earth Catalogue, which was published at the very end of the 1960s. It's really a book that tries to put the internet in a book before the internet was imagined. It's a network of information. And he follows how the hippies gradually became entrepreneurs. They gradually became new capitalist entrepreneurs. And Apple, in many ways, is the best example. Their ideas were idealistic. He uses this term cyber-utopianism. So there was an idea here that technology would really transform everything. Technology would liberate people. Technology would set us free. Technology would create new kinds of community, new kinds of learning, new networks, new forms of collaboration. In a way, you could say that this was a kind of technological determinism. The idea was that technology would change everything, irrespective of who was using it, what they were using it for. It was, some people have called this the Californian ideology. Yes, it's an idea of social change happening directly from the influence of technology. I think those ideas are still around. We could look to the beginning of the 21st century. So we had the dot-com boom and then the bubble burst. And in the wake of that, the birth of Web 2.0, or I guess really what we would now call social media. And when Web 2.0 came along, many of the same ideas. So the use of social media to create participation, to revive democracy, to create creativity. These are very familiar ideas, and they're ideas that are really about empowering people. The old hippie slogan was power to the people. And in a sense, the idea was that technology would bring power to the people. Those ideas, I think, were around in education as well. You can't see this too well, but it's an old advertisement for Apple computers. And Apple, I think, have been very successful in branding themselves as an educational company in many ways. And this kind of advertising, in a way, it's telling us a similar story about education. So what we have is the idea that technology would transform learning. It would democratize the classroom. Some people argued that actually technologies would make teachers unnecessary. They would make schools unnecessary. So the idea was that technology would, in itself, create a new kind of learning, a new form of education. In a way, it was the Californian ideology of education. And when Web 2.0 came along, we had people arguing for media studies or media education 2.0. So the idea was that what we needed to do was to give students these tools. We would give students tablet computers, mobile phones, etc., and suddenly they would become creative. Suddenly, magically, students would be liberated and everything would change. And these people argued that really we don't need critical thinking anymore. Critical thinking is out of date, it's old-fashioned. Critical thinking, people said, was patronizing. It was authoritarian. All we needed really to do was to allow students to participate in a creative way with technology. And these ideas, I think, are still around in a lot of the discussion of media in education. I'm afraid, you've probably understood already, I disagree. So I didn't agree with these ideas at the time, 10, 20 years ago. I don't agree with them now. I want to make an argument that we need a critical approach to how we use media and technology in education.
Okay. Molto velocemente, quindi assistiamo tutti a un cambiamento nel panorama mediatico per effetto delle trasformazioni tecnologiche soprattutto, però se incominciamo a dare uno sguardo al passato, ci diceva il professor Buckingam, notiamo che, citava questo libro di questo studioso che si chiama Fred Turner, dalla controcultura alla cybercultura, notiamo appunto che c'è stato questo passaggio da un'epoca in cui personaggi come Steve Jobs e Wozniak negli anni 70 si presentavano come degli idealisti, facendo proprio quella che era la controcultura hippie di quegli anni, e che poi nel corso con il passaggio degli anni si sono trasformati, Apple è un caso emblematico in questo senso, si sono trasformati in veri e propri imprenditori digitali. E appunto Fred Turner parla di questo di questa utopia cyber, per cui la tecnologia ci avrebbe reso, e in particolar modo la tecnologia legata alla rete, ci avrebbe reso tutti molto più liberi, molto più partecipativi, avrebbe facilitato l'accesso alla conoscenza, all'informazione, quindi alle più diverse forme di sapere, alla comunicazione, eccetera. Veramente una utopia che è poi quella che è conosciuta anche come la cosiddetta ideologia californiana. E questa è una posizione tecnodeterministica, in fondo, quella cioè di attribuire alla tecnologia la capacità di provocare mutamento sociale a prescindere da quelli che poi erano invece i tipi di uso, i contesti di uso, chi usa la tecnologia, come la usa, eccetera, eccetera. È sicuramente una posizione tecnodeterministica. E oggi noi assistiamo ad una riproposizione di questo... Ah, ok, sono più lungo di lui. Ok, vado molto brevemente, scusate. Va bene, avete ragione, avevo promesso che sarei stata molto breve, non lo sono, sarò molto breve. Quindi questa idea dell'utopia cyber si sta riproponendo con il Web 2.0 e anche l'educazione ha sposato questa utopia, per cui le tecnologie renderanno l'educazione più semplice. Lui non è d'accordo con questa posizione perché ritiene che in realtà il pensiero critico continua ad essere importante, cerchiamo di capire come. Sorry.
It's too long, but it sounds really better in Italian. Don't you think? La ideologia californiana. Oh, it's excellent. It's such a good language. Yes. Okay. So I was saying, I don't agree with these ideas, and I think in the last maybe 2 years, I feel vindicated. I feel that I'm right. I mean, this is one story that we are all familiar with. Over the last year, the story of Cambridge Analytica, this company that harvested data of 50 million Facebook users, probably many of you, and sold it to the Donald Trump campaign. Yes? I think almost now every week, it seems to me, there is a new book published, in English anyway, which is telling us all about how the internet will, or social media, will take us all to hell. Yes? So we have, and interestingly, many of these books are written by the people who used to be the cyber utopians. Yes? Jaron Lanier, who wrote this book, it's called 10 Arguments for Deleting Your Social Media Accounts Right Now. He was one of the innovators of virtual reality. Yes? He was one of the original Californians. Tim Wu was an executive in a new media, social media company. And his book, well, you can see from the title, How Big Business Lured Us In and Sold Us Out. And what you're finding is interestingly, many of the executives of these companies are now saying, oh yes, you know, I work for Facebook, but I don't allow my children to go on Facebook. Yes? They're expressing a fear and anxiety about their own children using these media. So in some ways, I think we're now seeing what we might call the techlash, the backlash against technology. There's been a shift in the public debate about technology in the last couple of years. Certainly for a long time, when we have talked about young people and digital media, there has been a fear about risk and safety. It used to be mainly about pornography and pedophiles, but actually in the last couple of years, I think the questions are now bigger questions. They're questions about democracy, about what kind of society we want to have, about how we conduct politics, and they're also questions about individuals' psychological well-being. So you're familiar with all this, the story of the social media zombie apocalypse. You know, we have fake news, post-truth. We have the story about a global information war. We have a story about online radicalization, organizations like ISIS using the internet for propaganda. We have concerns, increasing concerns about privacy, about these companies harvesting data and using that data and selling it. So concerns about our personal data, our privacy being invaded. We have concerns about how we all behave online, abuse online, hate speech, cyberbullying among young people in particular. And we have now concerns about addiction, the idea that we're all increasingly addicted to our smartphones, our devices, and what are the implications? How is this harming our mental health? Now, I think in some ways you can say this is just another example of a media panic, and we have a long history of media panics. You can look back through history, you can look back to computer games, to video, television, film, and actually you can go back even to ancient history, and you can find examples of concerns about the effects of new media on young people in particular. I think we need to be careful about those concerns. There is always a danger of panic, of hysteria, if you like. There is always, in particular, a danger that we blame the media for everything that is going wrong in society. But nevertheless, I think it's interesting now that the debate about social media, digital media, has changed really significantly. Now, increasingly, as educators as well, we're being asked to find the answers to these problems.
Questa volta sarò velocissima, ma veloce proprio.
Velocissima.
Velocissima. Ci ho fatto vedere alcuni libri. La cosa interessante è che oggi i critici del web 2.0, dei rischi del web 2.0, paradossalmente sono gli stessi che fino a qualche anno fa provenivano da quella che era l'ideologia, appunto la famosa ideologia californiana. Oggi, quando parliamo e quando pensiamo ai social media, pensiamo a tutta una serie di rischi che sono collegati ai social media. In passato, riguardo ai vecchi media, erano soprattutto rischi che avevano a che vedere con la violenza, il sesso, la sicurezza, eccetera. Oggi si aggiungono anche altre preoccupazioni che riguardano la democrazia, il benessere psicologico delle persone, la datificazione, problemi legati alla privacy, eccetera, eccetera. E c'è una pressione crescente verso la media education come possibile risoluzione di riguardo a questi rischi, a questi problemi, e i media vengono ancora una volta, in una sorta di nuovo panico morale, ritenuti come il capro espiatorio rispetto a queste problematiche. Ma dobbiamo stare attenti nel momento in cui pensiamo ancora una volta in termini di panico morale. Why do we need to be aware, be careful about thinking about, again, moral panic?
Why?
Why does it?
Why does it matter?
Yes.
Because I would say often there is not very good evidence for these concerns. Often these concerns are being mobilized by people who have much bigger issues that they are concerned about. Often it comes from people from particular moral, sometimes religious, sometimes political persuasions. But the media become the focus for them because it's an easy button to press. The anxiety about media is easy to provoke.
It's a scapegoat.
Yes? I'll go. Shall I go on?
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, thank you. I want to use fake news as an example because in some ways it's an interesting question. Is fake news actually just another moral panic? I'm not answering that question. I'm leaving it with you. I think we need to take care here because on one level, yes, fake news is a problem. It's a problem for democracy. Democracy depends upon us all being informed. It depends upon us relying on and feeling that we can trust the sources of information that we use. But actually, increasingly, what you've seen, and I think we've been talking about fake news for maybe 2 years now, that's all, and already fake news is a charge that everybody can use. So if you look at Donald Trump's tweets, yes, Donald Trump, who people would say is the main purveyor of fake news, actually now accuses other media of fake news. Everybody will go around saying to people they don't agree with, if you don't agree with me, you are fake news. Yes? These tweets actually are really interesting. So Donald Trump says, you know, don't trust the media. The media are not honest. If they don't say who the sources are, then don't trust them, don't believe them. Down here, he says, an extremely credible source has told me that Barack Obama's birth certificate is a fraud. So, you know, there's a contradiction. So I think we should be careful. I think we should actually look hard at the evidence. One of the problems here is that fake news is often not very well defined. Are we talking about things that are just not true? Are we talking about things that are biased? Are we talking about propaganda? It's not immediately obvious what fake news is. People say we're living in with an epidemic of fake news. Well, actually, how prevalent is fake news? What do we know about that? And in particular, what do we know about the influence of fake news? Because always when we talk about the effects of media, we're talking about other people. You know, all of us, we're too smart. You know, we can understand fake news. It's those other people who are the problem. Yeah? So I think we need to be careful about the evidence here. I would say that fake news is actually a symptom of bigger issues. One of the problems here always is that we tend to look at a small problem and we're not looking at the bigger issues. So what do I mean, the bigger issues? Well, partly I would say fake news is a symptom of changes in the business of media. Fake news is clickbait. Yes, one of the reasons why fake news exists, one reason why people make money out of fake news is because people click on it and they distribute it. During the Donald Trump, the 2016 election campaign, they found that actually one of the groups of people distributing fake news in favor of Donald Trump was a group of teenagers in a town in Macedonia. Yes? And they were doing this simply because it was a way of making money. Yes? They would get their message out there, they would get the advertising revenue. So this is a symptom, in some ways, of a change in the media environment and actually in the business of media. And also, obviously, it's a symptom of a change in the political environment. The political environment in many countries is more polarized. People are more likely to believe in conspiracy theories, that there are powerful people out there who are not speaking the truth. So I think there's a sense I would have almost that fake news becomes a kind of distraction, that we talk about this isolated problem, and actually what we need to be talking about is the bigger picture. What do we do about fake news? Well, there are technological solutions that governments and technology companies have looked for. So if you listen to Mark Zuckerberg will tell us that he will employ a few fact checkers to solve the problem. Or even better, what he'll do is he'll invent an algorithm, and the algorithm will be able to detect fake news. I think actually those technological solutions make the problem seem very, very simple and straightforward. And actually it's a more complicated and a bigger problem. What we've also found, and this is important for us as educators, is that increasingly people are looking to media literacy, media education, as an alternative way of dealing with the problem. So what you have are things like this. This is an American checklist, and there are many, many of these. Public information campaigns, resources for teachers to use in the classroom. Here we have 11 ways to spot fake news. You know, you look at the design of the website, you look at the sources, you cross-check, you do a whole series of procedures to identify fake news. I think there's a question here really, which is, you know, if we went through this list, I don't do all those things. I'm not sure if any of you do all of those things. There's a danger that we offer an idea of what a media literate person is that is just not really realistic. It doesn't really correspond to what we do in real life. But we have people making these kinds of proposals. And I think this kind of checklist approach, 11 things to do before you can identify fake news, is actually a very limited approach. I think one of the big problems here is that people often assume that there is a straightforward distinction between true and false, that there is fake news and there's truth, or fake news and real news. There's truth and there's falsehood. And actually the problem is that, yes, there is truth, yes, there is falsehood, but in between those two, there are many, many levels and degrees of truth. There is a big gray area between black and white. I think in terms of teaching, this is really difficult. You know, if you teach, even if you teach teenagers, teaching about news is difficult because you have to know a certain amount about the stories. If we're looking at a story about the refugee crisis, for example, actually we have to understand why are refugees fleeing from these countries? Why are refugees wanting to come here? We need to understand a lot of the background. We need to understand some facts and some information about the story. And also, we have to be interested. And if you teach teenagers, you will know that many of them will say, I don't care. I'm not interested. I don't know about news. I don't want to know about news. And even if we try to get across information, there is the danger that we think that somehow if we give them the correct information, if we tell them the truth, somehow this will change their minds. So they may have the wrong idea about refugees, for example. If we tell them the truth about refugees, suddenly they will realize, oh yes, I was wrong, I've changed my ideas. So there's a danger here that we assume that this is going to be really simple. Yes, that we have a checklist, we can tell the difference between truth and falsehood, and the problem is solved. And apart from anything else, this approach tends to ignore real news. It says, is real news okay? Sorry, I'm sitting in front of... The danger is we assume that once we've found the fake news, then the real news is fine. But of course, my question would be, can we really trust journalists? Can we trust professional journalists? The point is that we need to be asking these critical questions about all forms of news, about all kinds of information, not just about the information that we decide is fake.
Wow.
Sorry, I'm getting longer. You're getting shorter. Sorry.
Dunque, fake news, l'esempio che ci vuole portare rispetto alla complessità del cambiamento con i nuovi media, eccetera, è l'esempio delle fake news, che sono un problema. Sorry, I need the mic. Sorry. Fake news è l'esempio che appunto David ci stava portando, il tema delle fake news comporta anche diventano un problema anche per la democrazia e tuttavia quando pensiamo alle fake news è un tema molto complesso perché a tutt'oggi dobbiamo stare attenti al fatto che è un tema che è difficile da definire, quale tipo di evidenza empirica abbiamo rispetto alle dimensioni di questo fenomeno, al reale impatto di questo fenomeno, al tipo di effetti che questo fenomeno provoca, quale seria evidenza empirica abbiamo di questa cosa. Le fake news in realtà sono un sintomo di questioni molto più grandi, molto più ampie, che toccano sia i media e in particolar modo gli aspetti economici legati ai media e toccano anche il mondo della politica, della cultura politica e del dibattito politico. E quindi a questo punto che cosa fare rispetto al tema delle fake news? Alcuni propongono delle soluzioni tecnologiche, come per esempio Facebook, che dice, annuncia che avrà una squadra di fact e a rintracciare le possibili fake news pubblicate su Facebook, oppure addirittura anche un algoritmo che dovrebbe essere in grado appunto di individuare le fake news. David Buckingam è molto scettico rispetto a soluzioni tecnologiche di questo tipo perché sembrano rendere il problema delle fake news molto semplici quando invece non lo è. Un'altra soluzione che viene richiamata è quella della media literacy e in particolar modo la media literacy attraverso la creazione di queste checklist. Ti dico in 10 punti cosa fare per poter avere quelle competenze tue personali di rintracciare le fake news. Anche rispetto a questo modo di pensare la fake news, David Buckingam è molto scettico perché semplifica ancora una volta un problema che è molto più complesso. Insegnare ad essere scettici rispetto alle fake news utilizzando le checklist dà l'impressione, parte dal presupposto che che sia facilmente individuabile ciò che è falso e ciò che è vero e che una volta che noi ai ragazzi abbiamo detto che cosa è vero, abbiamo risolto il problema. E una volta che i ragazzi hanno imparato che questa è la fake news, tutto ciò che è diverso, tutte le news che sono diverse dalle fake news, ovvero il giornalismo professionista per esempio, è inevitabilmente e sicuramente vero. E invece no, perché in realtà sappiamo benissimo che la manipolazione, la distorsione può anche esserci nell'informazione tradizionale. Quindi che fare allora a questo punto, se anche questo tipo di media literacy ha qualche problema? So, if teaching about fake news through checklist is not going to work or it's limited, what shall we do?
Okay.
That's, I guess, your next point.
I mean, I've been talking about fake news, but I could be making the same argument about many of these other social media problems, yes? So cyberbullying or online radicalization or hate speech. What we tend to get is a sudden concern about a problem, and education, media literacy education, comes to be seen as the answer. My argument is that we need a bigger picture. Yes? The danger is that we have these problems, we treat the problems in isolation. We tend to look at the symptoms and not the causes. I said before, I think fake news is a symptom of bigger changes happening in the media environment, bigger changes happening in the political environment. We actually need to look at that bigger picture, not just at the symptom of what is wrong. And the danger then in educational terms is that we are expected to offer a quick fix solution. You know, here is my checklist, here is my teaching kit for teaching about fake news. The idea that we can have a quick fix that will solve the problem. And often we do this in a very fragmented, isolated kind of way. I think also the other problem here is that it makes us as the teachers the protectors, the saviors of children. Yes, it puts us in the position of having to protect children from harm, from harmful influences. So that presents media education as a kind of defensive activity. Media education, if you like, becomes a kind of contraceptive. Yes? So I think there are problems with how we teach in this way, just in response to problems. It tends to present media literacy in an individualistic way. And what I'm arguing is that we need a bigger critical approach. So, okay, what is the bigger picture? Well, in a way, this is the bigger picture. It's what we might call digital capitalism, or some people call it platform capitalism, communicative capitalism. There are different words. But these are forms of industry that basically work by gathering and selling data. Yeah? We use these services. Many of these services seem to be free. It doesn't cost us money to use Facebook or to use Google. And the famous slogan is, if the service is free, you are the product. Yes? You or your data is the product. Yes? So what we're looking at here is actually quite a small number of companies. Sometimes they are called the GAFA, G-A-F-A. And these are almost monopoly companies in particular sectors of the media communication environment. So if we look at Facebook, for example, Facebook has 2.2 billion users in the world. Something like 1/3 of the world's population is on Facebook. Actually, if you look at other social networks, they're nowhere, really. Young people, interestingly, moving now to Instagram, but who owns Instagram? Yeah, it's Facebook. Yeah. So what we have is a situation where one company really dominates the market. This is what is sometimes called the network effect. So we joined Facebook because all of our friends are on there, and we don't want to go off Facebook because we will lose our friends. So the logic is that if a platform is successful, it will get bigger. It will gradually become a monopoly. If you look at Google, what can I give you some figures? More than 90% of searches online are with Google. 3.5 billion searches every day via Google. Again, other platforms, you can search on other platforms, but they're trivial. They're like 1%, 2%. Google is 90%. Google is the internet's search engine. And Google is actually far and away the largest media company in the world. Google is twice as large as the second largest media company, which is actually Disney, interestingly. So, you know, again, Google has an incredible dominance in its marketplace. Google also, as many of us will know, Google also owns the leading platform for distributing multimedia content, YouTube. Young people now are increasingly deserting broadcast television. They're on YouTube. YouTube has about 80% of the market in multimedia distribution. Amazon increasingly dominates online retail. Amazon has now half the market in online retail in the US, and it's growing all the time. It's partly because we're no longer using shops, we're shopping online, but there's also a network effect here. We go on Amazon because actually lots of other companies are using Amazon as a platform to sell products. So increasingly the company is going to become effectively online shopping. I think I read recently an article that said it's not that Amazon wants to dominate the market, it wants to be the market. Yes? And then we have Apple, whose products I like to use, and I'm advertising for you here. Apple is a hardware company. You know, it has a massively successful set of devices. There are 700 million iPhone users in the world. There are actually more people using other devices, but Apple is increasingly also dominating the market in music distribution, in paid-for movie content. Amazon, again, is increasingly now moving into media production. So we have these four companies. They have different histories, they have different profiles, but they are among the most profitable companies of any kind in the world. They dominate the media communications marketplace, and they really want to stay that way.
Come detto prima, l'esempio delle fake news potrebbe anche essere associato allo stesso ragionamento che è stato fatto per le fake news, si potrebbe anche fare con altri problemi, diciamo, questioni che oggi vengono sollevate, come può essere il cyberbullying, il hate speech, eccetera, eccetera. Il modo in cui vengono trattati è molto simile a quello delle fake news. Quello cioè di guardare e di concentrare l'attenzione su quello che è il sintomo, dimenticando poi quella che è appunto il quadro più grande, che sono cioè le cause molto complesse, su molteplici livelli. Quindi qual è questo quadro più ampio? Il quadro più ampio è quello del digital capitalism, no? Del capitalismo digitale, del capitalismo delle piattaforme, eccetera, eccetera. L'idea cioè che si sta venendo a creare una situazione per cui 4 compagnie in particolare, che sarebbero quelle di questo acronimo che si viene a creare, come vedete, mettendo insieme i logo di queste grandi aziende, diciamo, di queste grandi multinazionali della comunicazione in rete, che sono appunto Google, Amazon, Facebook e Il fatto è che appunto, queste grandi industrie, per le quali David ci ha dato tutta una serie di cifre che ci dicono delle dimensioni, che io non sto qui a riportare, anche perché le potete tranquillamente googlare, tanto così non ne veniamo fuori, e le trovate. Però ecco, la cosa interessante che ci ha detto è che qual è il profitto, su che cosa basano il profitto queste 4 grandi monopoli, perché si stanno venendo a creare dei monopoli nei fatti, è quello cioè di raccogliere e di vendere i dati che gli utenti a più riprese e su più contesti lasciano, quindi tutto il tema della datificazione. È stato interessante una frase che ha citato, quella per cui se un servizio è gratuito, allora questo vuol dire che tu sei il prodotto. If a service is free, then you are the product, which is something that we could also say we could have also said for television audience and commercial television.
Yeah.
Free television,
Yeah.
then you are the product.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's it. Please
Yeah.
go on.
Although I think the difference now is that we actually produce the content.
Right, which we did
Yes.
as television.
So
You're right.
with television, with old television, the audience was the commodity. The
Right.
audience was sold, but actually we did get products that other people have produced. Now we produce the content. It's the perfect business model.
Yes, they don't even have to
Okay.
worry about content. That's true.
So what do we do? What happens in this highly technological, big business environment? Well, I think governments don't want to regulate this world. Governments, by and large, are committed to the so-called free market. Governments will say, well, actually, it's very hard to regulate this technology. What we need to do is, business needs to run this world. And business companies obviously don't want regulation. They don't want to address these problems. So if you think about how Mark Zuckerberg responded to the anxiety around fake news, he says, well, first of all, this is nothing to do with us. Then he says, well, maybe, okay, we'll appoint a few fact checkers. But really, if these companies start to acknowledge that they are responsible for content, if they start to acknowledge that they are in the media business, not just the technology business, then they have a problem, because their basic business model falls apart. Yes? If they start, at the moment, they can present themselves as technological services. We provide services. What people do with those services is their choice. Yeah? If they start having to take responsibility for content, then they have a problem. So what we have internationally is people saying, well, look, we can't have regulation. What we'll have instead is we'll have media literacy. So media literacy gets to regulation. Media literacy will be the way of dealing with all these problems. And in some cases, we're talking about media education. There is an educational dimension. And in some ways, you'll be very familiar with this issue. So we have a social problem. What are we going to do? Well, we can't do anything about it, so the teachers will solve it. Yes? This is what we call passing the buck. Yes? So we have a problem with drugs, we have a problem with teenage pregnancy, we have a problem with violence, we have a problem with, you name it. Teachers will solve the problem. So what's going on is a passing of the buck to teachers. And some of us who are media educators, this is a very interesting moment, yes? Because suddenly people are talking about media literacy. Suddenly they're talking about the idea, oh, perhaps we should be teaching about media. And I say, well, yes, I've been saying that for 40 years, and now my time has come. But I think there is a problem. There's a problem that in this context we put our hands up and we say, yes, we can do that. We can do that. We know about that. And I think actually there are some dangers at this moment. There is a danger, actually, if we present ourselves as being the ones with the answer to the problem, if we present ourselves as having the solution to these problems. Because, as I've said, the problems are bigger. You know, the problems are very big, and actually we don't have the complete answer to the problem. There's a story here about media literacy in the UK, which I will say a little bit about. We had, in 2003, a new Communications Act. It was a new act to regulate the media environment, and it created this organization called Ofcom. Ofcom is now the regulator for media and telecommunications in the UK. This is Ofcom's headquarters building in London. It has a very big stomach, which somehow tells you something about Ofcom. And for Ofcom, in the Communications Act, Ofcom was given responsibility for media literacy. Ofcom was expected to promote media literacy. The Act didn't define media literacy, it didn't define promote, but this was a responsibility for Ofcom. And so the media educators were getting quite excited at this point. I have to say that in about 6 years, media literacy was finished. Media literacy was very fashionable for a certain time, and by about 2009, 2010, it was finished. It was dead. Yes? Or at least media literacy had become much narrower. Media literacy had become about internet safety, and it had become about giving technical skills to disadvantaged or excluded communities. Yes? But any bigger view that we might have of media literacy as being about critical understanding, that was not what was on the agenda anymore. So media literacy became very fashionable and then very quickly went out of fashion. And I think the key reason for this was because media literacy was never an educational priority. Media literacy was something coming from cultural policy, from communications policy. It was never something that really engaged the Ministry for Education. They wanted to do other things. They were not interested in media literacy, and they resisted it. I think my argument is that this kind of media literacy was very much an individualistic idea. In a sense, the whole thing was about pushing responsibility back to the individual consumer. So it was the government saying, well, we have this much more complex media environment. It's global, there are new technologies, we have the internet, there are all sorts of risks and dangers. And actually, it's you, the consumer, who will have to deal with these problems. What we'll do is we'll try to make people more media literate. We'll try to make them responsible. But what it does is it passes the buck to the individual consumer. And that is something I think we can see in many other areas of social policy over the last 20 years. In some ways, you could say this is classic neoliberal social policy. The state isn't responsible. The state can't regulate the market. It's the individual that has to deal with the problems that are caused by a much more marketized environment.
Dunque, appunto, che facciamo? I governi ovviamente in questa situazione, quella che abbiamo appena descritto, avevamo descritto del capitalismo digitale, quindi di questo strapotere sempre più grande che queste multinazionali vengono ad avere, i governi evidentemente sono poco disponibili, poco disposti a fare una qualche opera di regolamentazione, perché è difficile regolamentare la rete, troppo complicato, come si fa, eccetera, e meno che meno vogliono essere regolamentate le multinazionali stesse. E allora che cosa fare? Bisogna la soluzione deve venire dalla media literacy, no? Cioè deve venire quindi dagli insegnanti. L'iter classico è, così come lo semplifica David Buckingam, è quello di: abbiamo un problema sociale, per esempio le fake news, i media vengono considerati come l'origine di questo problema, e allora come lo risolviamo questo problema? Lo risolviamo attraverso la media literacy, che dice ai ragazzi in una posizione protezionistica: non state attenti ai media, e abbiamo risolto il problema. Questo è un modo estremamente semplicistico di affrontare le questioni, e comunque la cosa importante è che a questo punto passing the buck, in italiano potremmo tradurlo con darci il cerino acceso, no? Il cerino acceso viene lasciato in mano agli insegnanti: ce l'avete voi, risolvete voi il problema. A questo punto gli insegnanti o gli educatori, risolvete voi il problema delle fake news, piuttosto che il hate speech, piuttosto che il cyberbullismo, eccetera, eccetera. Ha poi raccontato brevemente, shall I tell about the Communication Act
Yeah,
2003?
I think briefly, 'cause
yes, okay, it's significantly, it's a significant example. Nel 2003 nel Regno Unito è stata fatta questa legge sulle comunicazioni, nell'ambito della quale viene creata l'authority, quella che noi in Italia abbiamo, anche noi, l'authority per le comunicazioni, che è Ofcam. Molto interessante, dice questa cosa, che il palazzo ha questa forma di questo stomaco un po' pieno, perché non so, ecco, dentro che cosa ci dovrebbe stare. Comunque, ad ogni modo, uno dei compiti che viene dato a Ofcam è quello di promuovere la media literacy. La media literacy non viene definita in questo Communication Act, non si sa bene che cosa dovrebbe essere questa media literacy, però è vero che nel Regno Unito in quegli anni, dopo il 2003, si fa un gran parlare, Ofcom fa un gran parlare di media literacy, che però in pochissimi anni viene ridotta e semplificata come una forma di skills tecnologico, skills tecnici. Dobbiamo insegnare ai ragazzi a come utilizzare le tecnologie, soprattutto ai ragazzi che provengono dalle aree svantaggiate. Questo vuol dire mettere una pietra tombale sulla concezione di media literacy come invece pensiero critico, okay? E questo ha posto quindi ha messo fine, diciamo, a questa cosa. Quindi oggi, con di nuovo questo parlare delle fake news, si riporta di nuovo l'interesse. Ma l'esempio del Communication Act che ci ha fatto David era perché appunto era un esempio per farci capire che in realtà in quella legge non c'era veramente un interesse educativo, era una legge in fondo che regolamentava e che proveniva dal Ministero della Comunicazione, che non aveva né la sensibilità né per pensare i temi ad una legge sulle comunicazioni che avesse anche un interesse pedagogico. That's the problem with the Communication Act.
Yeah.
No education, no real education interest, and not even competence, I would say, from these people.
Sure. Okay, I'm looking at the time.
Yes.
And I'm thinking
that we should be...
I will do 2 more slides and then a conclusion.
Yes.
Okay. So, my argument is that media literacy of that kind is really not enough, that we need media literacy education. As I've said, one of the problems is people didn't really think about the educational dimension of this. My feeling is that without education, media literacy is just an empty gesture. It's hot air, it's rhetoric. I think that we have a comprehensive, coherent approach to many of these issues. Yes? I think actually in the UK over the last 40 years, actually, we have developed a framework, a critical framework for analyzing media and for doing media education practically in the classroom that can address many of these problems, cyberbullying, fake news, etc. And it's a much more coherent approach. It's not about saying, oh, what's the next problem? Let's have a quick fix for that problem. Let's solve this problem. Actually, what we have is a much more coherent approach. It's also, I would say, not a simplistic approach. It's not about telling the difference between truth and falsehood. It's actually more subtle and more complex than that. And it's not a defensive approach. It's not about telling children that they should not do bad things on the internet. It's something that needs to happen in formal education. I think it's important that media literacy, media education happens outside schools. It needs to happen in homes, in communities. But I think the school is really important. Many of the cyber utopians imagined that schools would disappear. Yes, in the 1960s and 1970s, people were saying schools are finished. Actually, we still have schools, and there are many reasons why I think we will continue to have schools. So it's really important that we struggle to establish this in schools, in formal educational institutions. And I think we have a systematic framework that we can apply to social media. One of the problems I find is that some media educators are saying, well, now with social media, everything is different. All those old ideas that you used to study television or newspapers, they're not relevant anymore. We need a completely new perspective. My argument is that actually many of the key ideas can be used to and applied to new media, to social media. One of the things I've been doing, and this is an edit in my presentation, on my blog over the last couple of months, I've been posting some examples of how we can take key concepts, key ideas in media education and apply them to social media, to the world of Facebook and Twitter and so on. So a key idea like media representation, media language. These are, for us in the UK anyway, this is part of the approach that we use to study television, to study old media. And my argument is, and what I'm trying to demonstrate on my blog, and I'm afraid, it's in English, but I'm trying to demonstrate that actually many of these ideas we can carry across and we can apply to new media.
Ok, quindi la media literacy che è venuta fuori dopo il Communication Act, dopo la legge sulle comunicazioni, ha certamente dei grossi limiti. Il professor Buckingam a un certo punto ha detto che la media literacy senza una reale, consapevolezza pedagogica è vuota, è un empty gesture, è aria fritta, e quindi ecco, questa dimensione pedagogica è molto molto importante. E in qualche modo abbiamo già un framework concettuale in qualche modo coerente, sistematico, che è stato elaborato nel corso degli anni e che negli scritti di David Buckingam lo possiamo facilmente ritrovare anche nella traduzione italiana che è stata fatta dei suoi libri. Penso per esempio al libro Media Education in traduzione italiana, dove viene presentato questo framework concettuale che è stato sviluppato, è vero, per i mass media, ma che, sostiene David Buckingam, può essere benissimo anche per l'analisi e lo studio in un contesto scolastico dei social media. Ha ribadito l'importanza della scuola come ambito nel quale questo tipo di attività vanno fatte, pur ovviamente sottolineando come questo possa essere fatto anche in altri contesti, ma la scuola, che se ne diceva in passato a proposito del fatto che con le nuove tecnologie la scuola sarebbe sparita, la descolarizzazione, eccetera, eccetera, la scuola è ancora qui e continua ad essere un luogo molto importante. Il framework concettuale c'è, lui mostra nel suo blog, attraverso tutta una serie di articoli, puntualmente come questo framework concettuale può essere concretamente applicato in classe anche per lo studio e l'analisi critica dei social media.
Okay, I'm almost at the end. Is the last question in a way is media education enough? Is media education the solution to this problem? And actually, I don't think it is enough. I think we need more than media education. Media education can develop critical understanding. It can help us to be creative, active participants in a media world, but it's not enough. We actually need more. So, as I've said, one of the problems is that often people look to media literacy or media education as an alternative to regulation. And my argument is that actually we need regulation as well. And if I have a slogan, you know, media education isn't just about the individual learning to cope, it's also about the individual demanding change. And very often, as I've said, with media, the traditional view of media literacy, it's about passing responsibility to the individual. We have a really complex world, a complex media world in which individuals are moving. They have to learn to cope with it and deal with the problems. My argument is that actually, yes, but they also need to demand change. We need critical understanding, but we also need critical action in a way. Certainly in relation to social media and the internet, we need to be thinking about forms of regulation that will protect the public good. So what do I mean by that? Well, I think we need, and we discussed this, we need to think about how we regulate content online. For example, there are rules offline in old media about political advertising. There are rules about political bias. There are rules about disinformation. It seems that those rules, those regulations, do not apply online. Well, actually, we should think about how they should apply online. Privacy, I think, is another big issue. One of the problems is that we volunteer to give away our privacy. We volunteer. When we click the box, the accept thing on terms and conditions, we are giving away the rights to use our data. I don't know about you, I never read those documents. And anyway, even if I do read those documents, I have no choice. If I want to use an app or a website, I have no choice. I have to tick the box. I think at least we need these companies to be much more transparent about the kind of contract that we are entering into. We are entering into a contract as a customer and a provider, and that the terms of that contract need to be much more transparent. I don't think most people really understand what is happening here, children or adults. There are big issues about access to these media, and actually at the moment we are used to the idea that access is free. As I've said, I actually don't think it's free at all. What we're doing is we are paying with our data. But increasingly, the whole question of what we're paying for will become a problem. The debate about net neutrality. Net neutrality means that actually the same service will be provided to everybody. And what we've seen, in fact, in the US now, is that companies, commercial companies, are going to be granted preferential access to these means of communication. Yes? So what that means is that if you pay, you get better service. You have control over the pipes or the wires down which this information comes. And I think that issue is going to be a big issue, a coming issue for us in Europe. And there's also related to that the question of ownership. Yes, as I've said, you know, we are making all the content, but actually Mark Zuckerberg owns the content. Everything that we produce, that we put up online, is owned by these companies. And if we leave, we can't take it with us. Yes, as you'll know, if you've tried to delete your social network account, if you've tried to delete your Facebook account, you can't take your content, you can't take your contents, your contacts rather, your social capital. You can't take it with you. So there is a big issue here about ownership. And as I've said, the tendency in these markets is towards monopoly. Monopoly is not guaranteed, and these are also risky businesses. Yes, I think we've all seen, many people here will remember MySpace as a platform that came and disappeared. We will remember probably searching with Yahoo. Do you remember? I think that's still around. eBay would be another company that is now, I think, in decline. It's quite possible that Facebook will not be here in 10 years' time. Young people are now abandoning Facebook. So this is not necessarily a guaranteed process. You know, capitalism is a complicated business. But nevertheless, you know, we have regulation in other sectors of the economy about monopoly. Yes, we monopolies in the economy because monopolies are unhealthy. So I think we should think as societies, you know, how far do we want to allow monopoly? And, you know, on the very basic level, these people need to pay their damn taxes. Yes? They do not pay their taxes, or they have some pretty, actually, I was going to say clever ways. They're not very clever. Actually, they're fairly simple, how you avoid taxes. And they should pay their taxes, and we should use the money from their taxes to fund reliable content online, to fund educational initiatives. There are many things that we need to be providing. If you just had a 1% levy on Mark Zuckerberg's profits, you would have a lot of money to spend on other things. So I think we need regulation. So it's not either education or regulation. For me, it's both. Shall I do my last slide and sum up and then finish? Okay. So I'm going to sum up the stages in my argument. I talked at the beginning about now a concern about the negative aspects of media change. And my point is that many of the concerns here about fake news, cyberbullying, hate speech, in some ways these things miss the point because they look at the symptoms and not the causes. They're not taking this bigger view, looking at the bigger picture that I've talked about. We need a bigger picture, but actually the bigger picture needs to be complicated. There's always a danger, and I've done it today. You know, when you talk about this, it's very easy to say capitalism is evil, and Mark Zuckerberg is the devil, and these companies are controlling us. And, you know, it is more complicated than that, and it's very easy for us to get into a kind of simple-minded anti-capitalism. Yes? I think actually it's really important to understand the complexities of all of this, and we need to take care about that. We need, I think I've argued, a critical form of media education. Yes, we need to give kids these tools. We need to enable them to be creative, to participate. This is all fine, but actually they also need a critical understanding. And my argument has been that many of the old concepts, the old approaches that we use to think about old media, television and other media, actually we can carry those concepts over to new media. But media literacy is not enough on its own. We also need to argue for reform and regulation of the media. So that's me finished, and a lot of this is on my blog, which is free to the world, but it is in English. So if you're interested, just go there and have a look. You're welcome.